Why do people measure things? Have you ever wondered that? Measurements are all around us. Let me give you some reasons why measuring is so important. We could just measure things because we're interested. We study things. We want to learn things. So we measure all kinds of things in science and in biology and physics and chemistry and accounting. It could just be interest. It could be photography, hobbies, whatever. People measure things also because they want to control things. Scientists, again, physicists. Measuring is all about controlling, perfecting, improving. But then people in other contexts measure things because they want to compare things. They want to compare things to one another. They want to compare themselves to other people. So they want to feel better about themselves if they compare themselves, thinking, well, I'm cleverer than her, but I'm not as clever as her. I'm taller than him, but I'm shorter than him. To check that things are within our comfort zones, things are within our safety limits. Maybe we measure things for happiness or joy, like Ebenezer Scrooge counting his money. If I have this much, then I'll be happy. We measure our children in exams and our performance, and we're graded. People measure things to see, will this new sofa fit in the lounge? And even there we measure to see if things will fit. When we're building something, we need measurements to check that we've got the resources. And can you see how suddenly measuring, it takes up so much of our lives, and so much of it is done naturally without thinking. Our whole lives are measured. Your life is measured. So the question I have for us this morning is, what do we do with a God who cannot be measured? And why do we need a God like that? God is infinite. That's what the Bible tells us. The God of the Bible cannot be measured. And that's a good thing. He's different from us. And that's a great truth. That's what I wanted to look at today. Here's these verses. Isaiah 40 verse 27, 28. Talking about God's people. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. You can't measure God with a clock. He's everlasting. He's going to outlive you and outlast me. We can't measure God by performance or Olympic gold medals, because it says here that he doesn't grow tired or weary. There's no fading in the last 50 meters with God. His power is infinite. And we don't measure God with exams. His understanding no one can fathom. And that's a great thing, that God is not like us. Because all of these areas in life that I've talked about, where we take measurements, ultimately their fulfillment is found in an infinite God. God alone can satisfy all these areas in my life where I would take measurements. So if I need a certain amount of this to be happy, God alone can meet that need. If I need a certain amount of that to be safe, God alone can meet that need. If I need something that brings me joy, only an infinite God can do that. And even in terms of relationships, how many friends do I have on Facebook? How many friends do I have in real life? Only an infinite God can be a father and a friend to all the people in the world. So it matters. You see, God makes promises, and I've made some promises just now, and I've told you what God can do. How do I know he's going to meet them? The answer is, I don't, unless God is infinite. And that's what I want to think about very briefly. In Isaiah verses 12 to 17, chapter 40 verses 12 to 17, we read these verses. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? Whose hand has marked off the heavens? Surely the nations are like a drop in a bucket. They are regarded as dust on the scales. He weighs the islands as though they were fine dust. When you were born, the midwife gave you a birth weight. It was the first written proof that you are not God, because you can be measured. And these verses in Isaiah are saying God is beyond measure, and God therefore measures me. He measures us. He talks about here about measuring the waters and the nations, and they're just like dust in the scales of God. We need to realise then that we are not the judge. God is the judge. We don't measure him, he measures us, because he's measureless. I've got a tape measure, this tape measure here, and it tells me it can measure 8 meters. It's not bad, is it? But I had to stretch it out to 20 meters the other day. How do I do that? Well, I have to stretch it out, leave a mark, walk some more distance, leave another mark, until I get to 20 meters. My measuring is so tiny. But God measures the nations and the oceans and the heavens. So, who am I? How do I define myself? That's what everyone's wanting to do these days, isn't it? The answer is, well, I define myself by God's definition of me. I'm not defined by myself. I have to surrender to God's definition. He's measureless. He defines me. Am I valuable? Am I precious? Am I important? Am I significant? Not if I measure myself, I'm not. But if God measures me, and God notices me, then suddenly I have value and meaning. That's the first thing. He's beyond measure. He measures us. Secondly, he's beyond compare. Only he can bring us joy. He's beyond compare. Only he can bring us joy. To whom then will you compare God? What idol or image will you compare God to? As for an idol, a craftsman casts it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold, even though it's just wood. So it's talking there about statues that primitive people worship. But actually, idols and statues like that, pretend gods, are still very, very real. Anything that is good, that we look for our ultimate significance or meaning, anything that we turn into a God thing, is an idol. So you may think that your physique or your beauty or your finances or your friendship groups or your relationships are the things where you find your ultimate happiness and security. They're all good things. But if you turn them into a God thing, if you look to them to meet the needs that only a divine God can give, then you've turned them into an idol. And you and I do that all the time, even without thinking. We find our happiness in all manner of things. We find our meaning in all sorts of things. The Bible says it's just wood that rots. We might layer it in gold, but it's just that. I always found it funny that people measured the quality of a diamond in carats. And as a young kid, I thought, how stupid. I mean, how precious is a carat? I was thinking about the carrots that grow in the ground. How foolish to measure a diamond by carats. But in every real sense, that's what we do all the time when we define our lives by the things around us, by our money, by our beauty, by our physical appearance, by our family, by our friendships, by how many holidays or cars. We measure ourselves to find our meaning. It's like measuring a diamond with carrots that grow in the ground. It's nonsense. Now, of course, now that I can speak English a bit better, I understand. It was the different sort of carrot. But you see my point. If you want to find real happiness, if you want to find real security, if you want to understand your place in the world, if you want to be happy, you need to know the God of infinity. You need to know the limitless God, the God of infinite beauty, infinite peace, infinite happiness. You need to know the perfect God, the God of the Bible, the God and Father of Jesus Christ. He's beyond compare. Only God can bring us joy. Where do you find your joy and happiness? Can I encourage you to think that actually you'll never find it in a perfect body, perfect bank balance, perfect relationships, perfect marriage, perfect children, perfect home. You won't find it. You'll only find it in the God who is perfect. So, moving quickly on, God sits above the circle of the earth. He's enthroned in the heavens. God rules, in other words. He's in charge. Just very briefly, did you see Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, these billionaires, using their money to fly into outer space? Do they rule the world, the billionaires? No, God says they're like grasshoppers. God sits above the circle of the earth, and he laughs at their puny efforts to reach outer space. Interestingly, Jeff Bezos took that 82-year-old former astronaut into space, and she said, basically, it was a bit disappointing. I would have wished it was longer. There wasn't a lot of time to do any zero gravity stuff. And the share price of Amazon fell because everyone suddenly thought, well, maybe these rocket flights aren't as great as everyone's cracking them up to be. Who rules the world? Is it the oligarchs and the billionaires? Is it the kings and the tyrants? No. It's God. He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth. Who do you think's in charge of your life then? You? Are you like Frank Sinatra, who did it your way? Why think like that? Power is an illusion. Only an infinite God can rule the world. We need him. I need him, you need him. Beyond the circle of the earth, God rules us. Beyond the stars, he names us and he knows us. At the end it says, look to the heavens. Who created all these things? He brings out the stars one by one and he names them all. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. It's as if the sun could disappear unless God's power keeps it going. So now we know the sun is this huge cosmic nuclear furnace in the sky. We can't comprehend of a universe where there isn't a sun. But God says, I've named that, I created it, and I keep it there. Now, the same thing is true of us. He knows us all by name. All the billions of stars, God named them all. All the billions of people, God named them all. God knows your name. And here's the great beauty of an infinite God. We sometimes think that if God is infinite, he must be distant. Some religions teach that God is far away, we can't touch him, we can't reach him. But the Bible says that as God is infinite, he's personal. The greater he is, the closer he can become. I mean, imagine if I gave you 500 names to remember. How would you do? 500 people that you had to get to know. How would you manage? You'd be saying, oh, tell me again your name, what's your situation? Only an infinite God can know me and you personally, intimately. Jesus says the same things, doesn't he? God knows the hairs on your head. He's numbered them. He knows you by name. You're more precious than many birds of the air and sparrows. Do not worry, says Jesus. Only an infinite God can actually love you and love me. So my question is, do you know this God personally? Is this the God that you think of when you say, I don't believe in God? Or do the God you don't believe in, is he just an imaginary God in your mind anyway that nobody would believe in? Chances are, if you defined your God to me and said, I don't believe in this God, I'd probably agree with you. Say, I don't believe in your God either. Thankfully, he isn't the real one. You can know this God personally through Jesus Christ. He said, oh, come. This is everlasting life, that they might know you, the one true God, and know your Son, Jesus Christ, whom you've sent. That's what real life is, knowing this God. And why has God revealed himself like this? Well, at the end of Isaiah 40, there are some amazing verses. And it says, he gives strength to the weary, he increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles, they will run and not grow weary, they will walk and not be faint. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. God is infinite, therefore he can give. The reason why this is so amazing is because God gives, and he's none the poorer for it. Maybe if you've asked your mum and dad for a present when you were a kid, or you've had children who ask you for a present, and they say back to you, we can't afford that. Sorry, I'd love to give you that, but beyond my bank balance. God never runs out of his resources. And that's why an infinite God is the only God worth knowing, because he's the only God who can give you hope, strength, love, meaning, purpose, significance. And it's all found in a relationship with Jesus Christ, who said, I've come that they might have life, life in all its fullness. So to wrap things up, you and I need this God, the God of infinity. And I know that because we are finite. I saw a few years ago, you can buy a clock that counts down how many days, hours, minutes and seconds you have left to live. Do you know roughly that if you live 70 years, that's 25,500 days? Doesn't sound much when you say it like that, does it? You're finite, and so am I. What's the answer? The answer is found in the infinite God, and Jesus tells us about it when he speaks about himself. At the graveside of his friend Lazarus, Jesus says these words, and this is the ultimate reason why we need this infinite God. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me shall live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Why do I need an infinite God? Because my days are finite.